Hi, Dole! Welcome back. I'm Daniel.
And I'm Garrett, and we're your hosts of Modern Gaze. On today's episode, we have a very special guest, therapist Brian Spitulnik, joining us to dive deep into the intricate connections between identity, sex, and the influence of porn in the LGBTQ community. Brian brings a wealth of experience and knowledge, and we're going to be talking about how being gay may shape some of our personal choices and relationships. Stay tuned as we unpack these important topics and gain valuable insights into our own lives and experiences.
Us gays? We just know how to do stuff.
Well, what about modern gays?
That's easy. Modern gays do everything.
So, Brian, thank you so much for joining us on Modern Gaze.
Thanks for having me, guys.
When we found your content on Instagram, actually, I believe, it was refreshing and it was really incredible to hear just really straightforward advice that you give so genuinely and also authentically, but also not too seriously. It was really relatable. As someone who offers so much rich knowledge, where did you decide that that platform was really great? And really, what do you do with your clients that may be a bit different?
I was in my own therapy, and then I was studying to be a therapist. And I thought, I don't understand. There's a whole world out there of Instagram therapists that I kept hearing about, and I kept thinking, how is that possible when it's such a private thing? And then when I got into the work, I really went into the field in order to help this community, gay men, specifically gay men in the arts, because that's where I come from. But I wanted to help gay men, and I wanted to reach them. And what I found was that in my sessions with my private clients, so many of them were saying the same things about relationships, about themselves, about their shame, about their bodies, about their addictions. And none of them were talking to each other. And that's when I thought, okay, I can go on Instagram, I can go on TikTok, and I can say this stuff out loud and see if anyone cares or see if anybody wants to talk about it with me. So that's how that began. And it's been really gratifying because, you know, the community has reached out. I mean, some people have not liked what I've had to say. That's been really interesting.
Hard truths. Yeah. Sometimes those hard truths.
Yeah, people of course have their opinions, and I'm talking about such personal content that people are going to react, and that's been really interesting for me as well.
You've mentioned that we all have very similar and common challenges that we face every day. What would be like the number one behaviors or repeated patterns that you would say comes to mind within the community?
I think the commonality is shame. You know, that's a human thing, but it's very specific for gay men. And you can kind of get as granular as you want. You know, the LGBTQ community has its own shame. And then, but if we're talking about gay men, which we are, shame in gay men manifests in this really specific way. It comes about when we don't even know what our difference is when we're young. I knew I was different. I knew I was sensitive. I knew I liked to dance. I knew I did things, and I played with dolls. Like, I did things that boys were not supposed to do.
Yeah.
And so that's how I knew that I was different and my difference was not okay. And every gay man has that at his core.
Yeah.
And so the way that manifests is, you know, there are endless ways that it come up, but that's the commonality. So more than the other things that are kind of outcroppings of it, eating disorders, body dysmorphia, addiction, just being judgmental in the first place, all of that kind of comes out of that core shame.
Every day to day, especially when you make big life decisions, right? Whether it's committing to a relationship or making a big change in your life, I feel like that inner saboteur or like that shame or that fear or that guilt always comes up. It's like, hey, are you sure I'm still here? I mean, I grew up, you know, discovering my identity and who I was as a kid and what I was into. And I think navigating that on your own and figuring out that on your own and if it's okay is, I think, very isolating in itself.
I know that when a lot of our friends are building relationships, there are specific things that kind of stop us from being truly authentic or truly honest with who we are and how we act and how we kind of form relationships. And we've had a lot of episodes about building new relationships with friends, meeting new gay friends, building up a community. Do you see some specific challenges or behaviors that kind of get in our own way when we're trying to form more authentic relationships with one another, specifically coming from a gay point of view or a sexual identity that might be defining us, or a label that we've self-labeled ourselves?
Mm-hmm. And do you mean romantic relationships versus friendships?
I mean the works. I mean, I guess like the works, because
It'd be different.
Because I feel like it's breaking down into three. Like, we all value sexual relationships that might be building intimacy, as well as actual romantic relationships that can be focused on building long-term connection, as well as platonic relationships where you both have the same sexual interests if you're in a group of a bunch of gay guys, but you genuinely want to build that platonic relationship that you can feel like you can trust and really rely on.
Yeah. Oh, this is really interesting. So I recorded a post today that I'm going to put up tomorrow, and it's about this. It's about the idea of having a chosen family. And I think it's important, even if you have an incredibly loving, supportive family of origin, which I do, which I'm really lucky, but still, that finding those relationships that are true and honest is so important, and it's very hard to find. I don't know what it's like really where you all are, but New York, it's this huge city with all these people, and yet it can be incredibly isolating. So here's the thing that happens. Gay men come out. So if you came out in your mid-20s, you are then in an adolescent phase, because like you're going through what you didn't go through when you were a teenager.
Right.
So now here you are, you're partying, you're rebelling, you're like figuring out, who am I? What does it mean? Like, is this identity all of me, or are there other parts that are not gay, or, who am I in the world? And when you're doing that, it's not a great time to like pick a soulmate and settle down and decide to have 2 kids, because you're still figuring out who you are. So what you can do, what is essential at that moment, and this is just when you're coming out, and then like it applies for the rest of your life, find the people in your life who you can have open, honest, trusting communication with. The people who you respect, the people who respect you. And there's a great quote from Bell Hooks, and the quote is, "True love is holding another's spiritual evolution as equal to your own." And that's a lot. I mean, that's a lot to put on a friendship, but I gotta take it and think, okay, well, if you can put someone's personal evolution as equal to your own, and that is a real friendship. I mean, think about like the true friendships in your life. Those friends truly want you to thrive in every way, and not just your career, not just your love life, but in every way. And if you really want that for them, then that is a real relationship. And if you have that in a friendship, then you know what to look for in a romantic partnership. Some people like hold their friends to really high standards, but then their boyfriend can treat them like absolute shit.
It's a double standard.
And the double standard of the way we expect a man to treat us, often as gay men, does not correspond to what we expect from our friends. And then that can also be the opposite. I see this a lot with my clients. I see this just having been a gay man in New York for so long. You get into a circle of gay friends, and all of a sudden you're kind of in this vortex. And no matter what it is, if it's like the drug scene, if it's like the circuit party scene, if it's just like they go to the opera and you don't like the opera, it can be whatever it is. Like you just like find yourself in this scene, and you're like, wait, this is not me. This is not what I value. This is not who I want to be in the world. Eventually you notice that, and you feel like there's something to be done.
That's so funny you say that, because Garrett and I have this discussion all the time. Like, obviously we're a married couple. We've been married for 2 years, been together for like 7. And we constantly meet new people, and we meet new groups of gay friends, and they kind of have this group or clique or identity of what they like to do. And we are kind of trying to balance of like, okay, do we like that? Is this what we want to do? Do we want to go out? Do we want to go to the beaches? Do we want to go here, go there? And I feel like there is no diversity in terms of like hobbies or activities or things to do. And it's kind of a tricky thing to navigate, I think.
It is.
There is a thing called tall poppy syndrome, which is a phenomenon, as they say, where many Australians feel that everyone should really be at the same level and be humble with one another.
Well, this takes me down a whole different rabbit hole, because all of the clinical work that I do is systems based. And so what you're talking about is like a system that's completely trying to be all one thing. And that's not how systems work. You know, they're human living organisms, and they're constantly moving, they're constantly changing. And people are always looking to see, like, what role do I have in this system? And often those are unhealthy roles that you take on. Not always, but often you're in a role that isn't quite fully you. And what happens if you come out of that role? Well, usually if you're out of that role, you're not all going to be at the same level.
Correct.
Because you're all different, unique individuals.
Right.
So there's definitely like the heterogeneity of hobbies. You know, people who like to go to circuit parties go to the circuit parties, and like that is their outing. People who like to go to the beaches go to the beaches. Like that is it. That is totally still true. It pops up in the strangest ways. It's, you know, this primal fear that you are going to be booted out of your tribe. And if you're booted out of your tribe, you have no more protection, you have no more shelter, you have no more love. And you're going to die alone in the wilderness. And that, I mean, that's the root of anybody kind of looking askance at somebody else and saying like, oh, you should do less.
Right.
What they're afraid of is that somebody thinks that they should do less and they're going to be, you know, left alone.
Do you feel like sometimes our own labels that we apply to ourselves help give us our sense of identity that we can also be very proud of, and seek other connection through? Do you also think that there's ways or times that it can hold us back from being more open-minded, in the sense of like when we build friendships or on the apps, like when we're trying to find a date for the night or long term, even in Grindr and Scruff and all the different platforms where there's tags and terms that we apply to what you identify as, but as well as what you're into, like that kind of trickles into your everyday interactions, you know, with some of your friends and community. Do you feel like there's specific times where that works against us?
That is a complicated question. And I think the answer is yes. There are times where it works against us. I'm thinking about all the ways our brain is evolutionarily wired to make distinctions. You know, this is good, this is bad, this is poisonous, this is not, this is something I like, this is something I don't. We automatically do that. So those are our biological biases. And then there are the cultural unconscious biases, and we know all about those. If you're on Grindr and you're like you say in your profile you're only into daddies and bears, that really narrows the playing field, and like you know what you're looking for and you know you're into that, and cool. And then of course it kind of is a false cutoff, because in reality you might know somebody, you might run into somebody and have some kind of undeniable chemistry, and they are not a daddy and they're not a bear. And so you're like, well, this is the exception. But you wouldn't know that
Right.
online. You know, there's no way that you would have that kind of interaction where you were like, oh, this is the time where my type isn't my type. Okay, so that's good to know. So it's limiting in that way online.
As we define who we are and explore what we're into, it can be quite cliquish, and then we fall into this clique or into this kind of idea, and our sexual identity or our sexual interests can then potentially affect how we build every relationship in our lives.
Yes, and it also cuts off the reality that everything changes. Everything changes. Nothing remains the same. Nothing remains static.
Right.
And that's true of any living organism, and we are living organisms. So to think that you're always going to want the same thing it's just not being in reality. So if you were a straight person and you got married to your high school sweetheart, and you were married at 21, and then you had babies, and then you get to 35 and you have 3 babies, and then, you know, classically at 40, you wake up and you buy a Porsche and you have a mistress and you're like, oh my God, where'd my life go? Like that's the midlife crisis. There's a reason that happens. It's not just because it's, a prison that they've designed for themselves. It's also because they change. Who they are, what they want, what they need is not the same as who they were when they were 18.
Mm-hmm.
And that is true of all of us. It of course limits your growth, your potential, by limiting who you allow to be your type or who you allow to be your friend.
Right.
And you did something really interesting on Instagram, or probably TikTok as well, with one of your reels where you discussed growing up and finding your identity and realizing you're a gay man at, like, I think you said 11 years old, and being on the phones and watching porn and having this perception of what it meant to be a gay man and what it meant to be into certain types of men. I thought that was very interesting because I grew up at 11, 14, like I said, realizing that I was gay, and I constantly used to find myself on the phone and glued to the phone to have that sense of community, whether that had been through Instagram or through apps like Bumble or Grindr or Scruff, whatever it might have been. And I think for many of us, it's very difficult to break away from the devices and from your phone and from that screen and build genuine connections in person, because we've all been there where we've spoken to someone on Instagram or we've replied to a story or on Grindr or an app, but in person it's like you're still non-existent, so it's very interesting that we've built that and we've become accustomed to that in our community.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you're talking about. This is something that I find particularly with my Gen Z clients, people who are now in their 20s, maybe early 30s, but there's this disembodiment that they experience in sexual relationships, even in friendships, even on a date. There's this sense of what you expect from sex was voyeuristic, it was at a distance. It was not, you were not really involved. And so that's what sex meant to you 2 generations ago. Men who were in the closet, maybe their whole lives, but maybe just until they were like 40. They spent 20 years of adulthood hooking up in bathhouses and in steam rooms and like under the bridge and at the docks. And so like that secret illicit outlet was sex. And so now they've come out, and so they try to start to have sex in a bed, and they're not interested. They still want to be under the bridge because that's what the sexual experience means to them. And that is, nothing wrong with going under the bridge unless you get caught and get a good jail, whatever. That's not great. But morally, there's nothing wrong with it. But the point is that like part of you is stuck. You're stuck in this place in the past that really served you. It really served you when you were 11 to like have this portal to the gay world where, to find out like, oh, I'm not alone. What I like and who I am is shared by all these millions of people. That is a huge thing for a gay kid to know. And I didn't have that growing up. I didn't know any gay people. And so probably one of the reasons I didn't know I was gay until like 18. And that was only because I started going to like theater camps and stuff. And I was like, oh, these people are gay. I'm gay too. A lot of the work I do, again, the systems work, there's internal family systems, which is, it's not about your family, your actual family. It's this family of parts that you have within you that kind of, some of them protect you, some of them manage you, some of them are being way pushed down so nobody gets to see them. So this 11-year-old, we'll just keep using him, he's still very much a part of you. And what he needed then, he probably still needs because he's kind of stuck there. But you're not 11. So like, what if you kind of went back and got him and brought him into the present and, found out what he needed and figured out how you could give it to him? Because you are an adult. You are healthy. You are whole. You have a lot of world experience. You could actually give this 11-year-old what he needs, bring him up to the present, kind of catch him up with the way you live your life now, who you are, what you've done. And then you can like have sex the way you want to have sex because you're not kind of meeting the needs of an 11-year-old.
Oh my God, I feel like we've just gone on a whole journey just then.
Well, you obviously get many clients that have different experiences, a lot of shared experiences, I'm sure, but have unique challenges that they're working through. We have a segment on this podcast called Only Whispers, where a lot of our listeners write in specific questions about what they may need some advice on. And we've actually had a couple questions that we've been holding on to for a while for a guest like yourself that can offer your expertise. Would it be all right if I ask you a couple Only Whispers questions?
Please. Yes, that sounds great.
Okay, cool. All right, so let's get into Only Whispers. All right, that's our shtick.
That's adorable.
I'm glad you find that hilarious.
Okay, so Rex from Sydney asks, I've been watching a lot of porn since my teenage years. Now I find that real life intimacy often feels less exciting, which sometimes leads me to disengage emotionally. I value sex way too much and I'm missing out on deeper connection. How can I find a better balance without fully blocking porn?
This is a big question.
And he added the extra without blocking porn. He obviously isn't willing to give it up.
Right. So the thing about porn is the thing about anything, everything, which is that there's nothing wrong with it inherently. You know, it's not a bad thing morally or ethically. There is nothing wrong with it. And there's nothing wrong with watching porn. The problem comes when it's interfering with your life. So this is true of any kind of addiction. Alcohol, there's nothing wrong with it. But if it starts to interfere with your work, with your relationships, with your life, it's defined as a problem. And that's what this guy is talking about. Porn is interrupting his life in that he's not able to find the connections and the relationships that he wants because porn is the substitute. He's having a relationship with porn. So there's a couple of things. One, I think that 12-step programs are great. They save lives all the time. I say they're not for everybody because they can really grate on people's nerves, but they are effective for everybody. So for somebody who's kind of unwilling to let go of porn and it's also interrupting his life, that's an addiction, and he should really go to a 12-step program for sex addiction or specifically for porn. Barring that, you know, there's kind of like a harm reduction model where like you don't have to abstain the way that like there's like harm reduction for heroin addicts too. It's like it would be really difficult on their bodies to just quit. So you do harm reduction, you do less. So what if you started having like a schedule and keeping to your schedule of porn? And then take yourself out into the world for an equal amount of time. Take yourself out, whether it's on dates, whether it's at the gym, at the bar, or wherever you're meeting people, wherever you can meet people, and see what it's like to actually interact, see what it's like to actually have a conversation, and notice the different voices that come up for you in your head, the different parts of you that come forward. Are you nervous? And like, if you're nervous, what is that nervous part trying to say to you? Is it saying like, okay, we've been too exposed, it's time to retreat? Or is that nervous part maybe saying like, okay, this is exciting and it's new and it's different. Maybe I'm okay in this situation.
We do have one more question. Thomas from Boston says, I'm stuck in a loop of endless swiping and a lot of chats on Grindr where it's just, hey, what's up? I want to delete the apps. Where do I find dates outside in the real world?
Delete the apps. Okay. So, you know, imagine it's 1998. Like, what did people do? It was a completely different world. And so I don't know what happens anymore if you don't have the apps, because the truth is you go to a gay bar and people are with their friends or they're on one of the apps seeing who's on the app in the bar.
Correct.
Crazy.
So what do you actually do? Well, you have to actually like walk up and talk to people. You have to.
Yeah.
And you also have to figure out what is interesting to you, what you like. Goes back to the conversation we were having about friendship. What do you value? What do you like to do with your time? What do you consider a valuable use of your time? And who are you going to meet in doing those things? Ideally, you meet people through friends, because there's that common something, and there's that kind of inherent trust. But outside of that, you can't really date in the workplace, or I know it's kind of frowned upon. So what do you really do? You have to risk being rejected. You have to risk someone saying no, and just walk up and say hello. And whatever happens from there, happens from there.
Yeah. Reading this question before, I was trying to think of what the solutions would be, and talking to you earlier, where you suggested some topics around shame and fear. Like perhaps even in our own safe spaces, and even though we can be out and proud, perhaps some of that shame or fear is still present, that we need to check an app to make sure that we get a little bit extra validation that someone else is here and gay and also interested in connecting.
Or also, if you get rejected at the bar very quickly on the apps, you can just quickly find somebody else and start a conversation. So it's like instant rejection is led to validation again.
Right. But as if it never happened.
Correct.
So what you're saying, Garrett, is completely accurate, I think, in that when you're at the bar and you see someone else is also at the bar, you have that triple layer of confirmation that yes, they're gay, they're looking.
Right. Code is the key word, because we have a lot of codes as we have tried to find, connection in others within our community going back decades before us and many generations. Like, we have always had specific code that we've tried to incorporate to kind of understand and seek each other out when we were in the closet or hidden.
There's no more code now. It's like, here I am.
And then you have a younger generation who immediately knows who they are at a very young age, but somehow this is still kind of lingering in that sense that
it still lingers, because we don't have the same language that we used to have. We don't have the same codes that we used to have, because ostensibly we don't need them, except that we still do live in a homophobic and heterosexist world. So that is still the overwhelming truth. So for every 50 people who wouldn't think twice when I tell them that I'm gay, there's another 50 people who I tell them and they think less of me. They think I'm less of a man or less of a human. That is the truth of the world we live in. So that is why the code, I think, does linger. Because these younger gay men who I do see in my practice, it's wonderful. I'm thrilled when they come in with their nails painted and in heels. The men I knew when I was in my 20s, I don't think we knew that was an option. I don't think it was.
100%.
But just because that outward expression is so explosive and so beautiful and so authentic, doesn't mean the inner experience is completely wiped clean. So they still live in the same world that we live in.
For sure.
Well, we are really thankful that you joined us to chat today. And I want to really seek out 3 practical, actionable tidbits of advice that you can share with our listeners, specifically to build more authentic and real connection.
First, so often we assume that we know what someone else is thinking. We make so many, this is just like how we communicate. We assume that we know what you're talking about, so then we can move on with the conversation, and you say what you're going to say, and then I say what I'm going to say. And often we are incorrect about what we think the other person meant or was saying. So there's a few ways to actually check this out in real time. And the big caveat is here, you kind of have to be in a relationship that you trust in order to check it out, because you can check it out all you want with your boss, but is your boss really going to tell you the truth? Who knows? Okay, so here's number 1. Check the facts. When you start telling yourself a story, so we'll say Daniel just said this thing to me, and I started worrying about, he meant X, Y, and Z, and this also means that everybody else thinks this, and now they're all going to hate me, and they're going to... So there's this whole story that starts to form. What if instead you came back to the facts? Okay, the first fact is that Daniel said to me, I love your shirt. How do I feel about that fact? Well, I feel quite happy because Daniel compliments my shirt. the story I was telling myself was that Daniel really hates my shirt, and he's going to go talk to everybody else about how much he hates my shirt. And then I have a whole story about all the other clothes that are in my closet. So what if I came back from all that and I just came to the facts? Daniel said he liked my shirt. How do I feel about that? I feel good. So that's one, check the facts. Two, say I was trying to read your mind, Garrett. My mind read is Garrett wants me to wrap it up. So I would say, Garrett, I have a mind read that you want me to wrap this up. Is that true? Yes or no? And so the tricky part here is, do I trust Garrett's yes or no? So if Garrett says, no, I want you to keep going, I have to check with myself and say, okay, do I believe him? Because if I don't believe him, that has nothing really to do with Garrett. It has something to do with what's going on between the two of us. So that's two. That's called checking out a mind read. And then three, and this is big in friendships, in romantic relationships, very basic reflective listening. So, Garrett, say something to me.
I love your home decor. It looks very comfortable and warm.
Thank you.
It's very Garrett.
I believe you because it is comfortable. Okay, so what I heard you say is that you love my home decor and you feel like it's comfortable. And I don't know if you said cozy, but I heard
Yeah,
cozy.
warm and cozy, yeah.
Warm and cozy, yeah. So did I get that? Did I get you correctly?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So what I just did was I reflected back. I mean, you happened to be complimenting my decor, so it was easy. But, you can use that, reflecting back. And then the important part is checking out what you just reflected back. So if you had said something a little bit more dicey, I don't want to go to that restaurant because the last time I was there, you were an absolute bitch. Okay, so Garrett, what I just heard you say is the last time we went to this restaurant, I was an absolute bitch. Did I get that correctly? And you would say yes. And that, just having that moment of reflecting back and checking out if that is indeed what you said, saved a whole night of arguing where it could have been what do you mean I was a bitch? I mean, there's so many ways that could have gone, or just quietly sulking for the rest of the night, whatever your mode is. So just doing that, reflecting back, checking out if I heard you correctly it saves you so much time. You also find out if you like this person. That is a part that is so overlooked, and this gets into the hookup thing. So often we, as human beings, but also we as gay men, are far more concerned with, does this person like me? Do they think I'm hot? Are they into me? Are they turned on? And you're not really fully checking in with yourself. Am I turned on? Do I like him? Do I think he's hot? Do I think he's kind? Do I think he's funny?
Well, I love those tips because it really focuses on just clarity and efficiency. We always communicate. We're communicating a lot. There's a lot. Well, there's a lot we say, but really focusing on checking the facts. And then I love that repetitive connection where you're did you just say this to me?
Let me tell you, Brian, I'm going to be saying, did I hear you say this?
Yeah, we're going to have some conversation.
Did you say this right? Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, Brian, so much for joining us on Modern Gaze.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. You guys are absolutely fantastic.
Thanks again to Brian, who has offered so many great ideas on how we can approach relationships much more honestly, much more authentically, and really just show up and be really true to ourselves.
If you're loving Modern Gaze, be sure to leave us a 5-star review wherever you're listening to our podcast. It helps spread the word about our show, reaching all members within our community.
So until next time, keep building the vibrant life you want by owning your authentic self.